Welcome to This Explainer, where we dive into how a massive roadblock on the internet was dismantled by a shockingly simple solution. Today, we're talking about two brothers who looked at the clunky, bureaucratic mess of online transactions and, well, effectively rewrote the economics of the internet. We're talking about Stripe, and those 7 little lines of code that literally changed everything. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's start by thinking about the invisible, often totally ignored infrastructure behind your everyday online checkouts. Like, when you click buy, it feels instantaneous, right? But what's actually happening in the background? Well, before 2010, the answer was basically a tangled, terrifying web of legacy banking infrastructure. And honestly, it was actively hostile to the exact people trying to build the modern internet, the developers. This really highlights the agonizing, multi-week banking hell that developers faced back in 2009 just to accept a single credit card. If you were a founder of building a web app back then, you couldn't just plug in a payment system. No way. You had to endure this step-by-step nightmare. You had to apply for a merchant account, wait for weeks, negotiate with a payment gateway, and then navigate these massive, confusing PCI compliance questionnaires. And get this, you even had to mail literal paper faxes to banks. Faxes.
So the crucial point here is that Patrick Collison, who co-founded Stripe with his brother John, looked at all this and realized this extreme friction was completely artificial. The underlying credit card networks, they actually worked fine. The real problem was that nobody had ever bothered to sit at the intersection of technology, financial regulation, and legal compliance. The banks didn't understand the developers, and the developers sure didn't understand banking law. The internet desperately needed a clean abstraction layer to just make it work.
Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast between that old, convoluted legacy banking system and the radical simplicity of Stripe's solution. The Collison brothers didn't just iterate on the old system, they totally bypassed the bureaucracy. With Stripe, a developer could open their terminal, paste in just 7 lines of code, and boom, suddenly their website could accept credit cards in a single afternoon. Stripe handled all the compliance, the bank negotiations, the fraud detection, all of it behind a single endpoint. It seriously felt like pure magic.
Let's take a quick look at the incredible journey of the Collison brothers. They literally went from reading programming books in a rural Irish village of under 100 people, where the internet was so bad they actually had to walk to the library, to eventually dropping out of Harvard and MIT. By their teens, they had already sold a company for $5 million. But you know, that payments problem kept bothering them. So they retreated to a cafe in Buenos Aires and built a $10 a day prototype of what would ultimately become Stripe.
This brings us to their famous hustle, which became legendary as the Collison installation. When they joined the Y Combinator accelerator, they didn't just wait around for users to figure out their product. If another founder needed a payment solution, Patrick or John would literally say, "Right then, give me your machine," and they grab their laptop and install the API on the spot. And interestingly, they deliberately charged a premium during their beta phase, a 5% fee plus 50 cents. Why? Because they weren't trying to compete on price. They wanted to filter for serious developers who truly valued an incredible user experience. Oh, and they had 0 sales team for the first few years.
And this number brilliantly illustrates the surprising seed valuation they secured from Sequoia Capital. Raising $2 million at a $20 million valuation at the seed stage back in 2011? Especially with almost no revenue, that was a massive vote of confidence. Investors like Michael Moritz could see that this wasn't just some quirky developer tool, it was a fundamental, essential layer of internet infrastructure.
Now, it's a fascinating piece of irony that PayPal's original founders, the PayPal Mafia, guys like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Max Levchin, actually invested in the platform that was meant to replace their own creation's developer experience. They had obviously built the first wave of internet money, but they instantly recognized what the Collisons had achieved. See, PayPal attacked payments from the consumer side with digital wallets. Stripe, they attacked it from the back end, building strictly for the developers.
Section 1. Stripe versus PayPal.
Let's look at a direct comparison of how Stripe stacks up against its biggest legacy rival today. For standard U.S. domestic card transactions, Stripe is generally a bit cheaper at 2.9% plus 30 cents. But, as you know, it's not just about the math. PayPal's core strength is its massive consumer brand recognition. Seeing that familiar PayPal button gives cautious buyers a sense of trust, which can completely offset a higher processing fee. So it comes down to the checkout flow. Stripe offers this fully integrated invisible API experience, while PayPal gives you that plug-and-play branded trust. So you might be wondering, why don't scaling businesses just use both? Well, as we see here, doing so traditionally creates some severe operational headaches.
If a company wants the developer flexibility of Stripe and the consumer trust of PayPal, they have to build two entirely separate integrations. And that means double the engineering resources to maintain them, finance teams pulling their hair out over fragmented reporting, divided transaction data, and a way more complicated checkout experience.
And that is exactly why payment orchestration platforms like Primer stepped onto the scene. They arose to give businesses the benefits of both Stripe and PayPal without the total engineering nightmare. Basically, payment orchestration acts as a centralizing layer. Instead of writing separate code for every provider, a company integrates just once with the orchestrator. Then, they can dynamically route transactions based on custom rules, like what's cheapest, what converts best, or whatever local preferences dictate.
To put the power of that into perspective, look at this number: 3.4 million euros. That is exactly how much Ferryhopper saved during a peak season processor outage by using automated fallback routing to a secondary payment provider. When one processor goes down, an orchestrator automatically retries the transaction on another provider in mere milliseconds. The customer doesn't even notice a hiccup, and the business saves literal millions in a matter of days. Talk about a lifesaver.
Section 2. The economic infrastructure of the Internet. Okay, let's dive into how Stripe moved way beyond simple checkout forms to become a comprehensive financial operating system. Because if they'd just stopped at processing credit cards, sure, they'd be successful, but they wouldn't be the giant they are today. This brilliantly illustrates their sticky, layered product ecosystem. With Stripe Atlas, a founder anywhere in the world can incorporate a US company in days. Then you've got Stripe Radar using machine learning for fraud detection, Stripe Treasury offering banking-as-a-service APIs, and Stripe Issuing for programmatic virtual and physical cards. Once a business plugs into this stack, it becomes an essential and highly inescapable layer between their ideas and their revenue.
Of course, it hasn't been a completely flawless rise. Like many tech giants, Stripe saw incredible surges during that 2020 and 2021 digital boom, but leadership admittedly miscalculated that post-pandemic growth, overestimating the internet economy. Patrick Collison was open about the fact that they grew operating costs too quickly. So when the economy cooled off, they had to make some really tough calls, resulting in necessary layoffs in late 2022 and early 2025 to regain their operational efficiency.
Despite those bumps, let's fast forward to 2024. Stripe processed a staggering $1.4 trillion, powering half of the Fortune 100. Just let that number sink in for a second. Over $1 trillion moving through code that essentially started as a hacky prototype in a Buenos Aires cafe. From tiny independent Shopify stores all the way up to massive enterprises like Amazon and Google, Stripe is out there tangibly increasing the GDP of the internet.
Now, what's really interesting here is the total roller coaster of their valuation history. It proves that despite serious economic volatility, their core technical moat remains incredibly valuable. They peaked during that zero interest rate frenzy at $95 billion, took a hard internal markdown to $50 billion in 2023, but then, by early 2026, their relentless execution pushed that valuation soaring back up to an eye-watering $159 billion. They survived all that turbulence because their product is, quite literally, the engine of internet commerce. I want to leave you with this provocative thought. What is the next artificial friction on the internet just waiting to be solved by 7 lines of code? Look around your own industry. Keep an eye out for unnecessarily complex, paper-heavy systems, because that might just be your billion-dollar problem to solve. Patrick and John didn't invent online payments. They just realized the difficulty of it was completely artificial. So, what processes in your daily work do you accept as just the way it is, but are actually bizarrely anachronistic? Find your own 7 lines of code, and you might just change the world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the friction around you.